Good morning, conference. The only reason I'm coming to you as a pre-record today is that Willie Rennie was anxious that I might say something salty. This way they can edit that out. It is a family show after all. 2 weeks ago, I found myself with an unexpected night off. I settled down to watch the beautiful documentary commissioned by BBC Alba, Charlie Kennedy, A Good Man Speaking. It was a wonderful watch. It had interviews with many old friends like Celia Munro and David Green, and it reminded us of the man that we have lost. Charles was our friend. To many of us who were young candidates when he was leader, he was a mentor, generous with his time and encouragement. Our party has suffered several hardships in these past 10 years, but in many ways, his passing was the hardest. With his loss, followed as it was by that of Paddy and the disappointments that we have faced in recent times, you might think that the flame of liberalism is guttering in Scotland right now. It isn't. Far from it. You need only look at the talented pool of candidates coming forward in the likes of Molly Nolan, Bruce Wilson and Jill Riley to see that the future of our party is on a sure footing, poised for growth. Our party means everything to me, everything. It's like a family, and we lost another member of that family last week in Derek Barry. Derek was Scottish campaign director when I joined and started working for the party 20 years ago. He was a short man, but he had so much heart and he was tenacious. When I worked alongside him, I was often reminded of the words of Mark Twain. It is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters, it's the size of the fight in the dog. Derek had a lot of fight, and we miss him. Conference, it's over a year since we last met in person, and in many ways that feels like a lifetime. Monday marked the first anniversary of the first COVID-positive patient in Scotland. Back then, this terrible disease barely even had a name. It only impacted on our work in abstract ways. Our MPs struggling to repatriate people from a city that many couldn't even find on a map. And then suddenly, everything changed. I attended a meeting a year ago this week with the National Clinical Director and Cabinet Secretary and the Chief Medical Officer, all of them ashen-faced. Then, in the space of a PowerPoint presentation, they shattered the illusion that we had that this virus could be contained. In a briefing to all opposition health spokespeople, they took us blinking into the light of what our new global reality would look like. They explained what was really meant by the word pandemic and what would be required of our health service and our communities. In a heartbeat and for several months, party politics just ended in Scotland, and we all moved with a singular determination to answer the public health emergency with a unified response. I hope you'll agree that our parliamentarians have all acted in a consensual and helpful manner to the government response where it has been appropriate for us to do so. Those were dark days. And when the lockdown came, Parliament felt like a tomb. It was largely deserted as all but security and catering staff had been sent home. It felt like the virus was crawling over every surface, and I had dermatitis on the backs of my hands from overwashing. It was a lonely place. And while restrictions permitted, I moved into Willie Rennie's office for company. It was a bit like having a university flatmate again. We bickered over what music to listen to, and I got cross at him for drying his running stuff on the radiator. That arrangement lasted about half a day, and I returned to the comfort and relative hygiene of my own office thereafter. But I want to take this moment to thank Willie, not just for the support and friendship he has offered me throughout this terrible year, but throughout my entire parliamentary career and the years before as well. Willie, you are one of my best friends, and you have served our party with distinction and saved it several times over. When people were writing us off, you were preparing us for success. I firmly believe that thanks to your unshakable resolve and your cheerful, relentlessly positive determination, that success is now in view and we need only reach for it. Willie, from all of us and from the bottom of my heart, thank you for all you do. Conference, of the minutes of the COVID advisory group of the 2nd of April last year, 2 things of note stand out. First, that the virus was moving around in hospitals in a way our clinicians couldn't understand. And secondly, that the government had resolved to accelerate the movement of elderly people out of those same hospitals and into our care homes. In those decisions lay the tragedy of Scotland's pandemic story. Patients whose COVID status was unknown or had even tested positive were transferred in those months of high infection to care homes that were crying out for PPE. Home after home succumbed to viral outbreaks and to a devastating human cost, despite valiant efforts of our amazing care workers. I hold no one individually responsible for those decisions. We did not fully understand this virus at the time, but it will haunt our country for years to come. The response in our care homes was swift, but it was also necessarily brutal. Isolation and quarantine became the first lines of defence against further infection. But as the months ticked by, the terrible human impact of those measures became apparent. In October, Willie and I attended a socially distanced demonstration outside of Parliament with the group Let Us Visit. They were made up of family members of those marooned in Scottish care homes. Each had 2 photos of their loved one. The first, taken before the emergency, usually featuring a jaunty Christmas hat or hugs with grandkids. The second was taken during lockdown, through a window, of drawn faces and sunken, haunted eyes. They had signs with them too, reading "COVID kills, but lockdown tortures." The 19th century French novelist Honoré de Balzac once wrote that solitude is fine, but you need somebody there to tell you that it's fine. The impact of isolation in Scottish care homes has unquestionably shortened lives and severed the final tethers of some dementia patients to reality. It is in large part thanks to the weekly pressure applied by Willie Rennie at First Minister's Questions that safe care home visiting can finally happen once again. Conference, we meet at the culmination of one of the most incendiary fortnights in the history of devolution. The titanic struggle between the seismic forces of Alex Salmond and Nicola Sturgeon is beginning to tear at the stitching in the very fabric of Scottish democracy. And that should worry us all. The conflict in the SNP has unfairly undermined confidence in our public institutions. It has revealed a power imbalance between the legislature and the executive, evidenced in the arrogance of ministers that would defy our nation's parliament not once, but on 2 occasions to prevent access to the legal advice that they ignored in the failed judicial review. They have destroyed all faith in the government's attempts to protect the victims of abuse and prolonged the agony of the women at the heart of this. And I want to speak directly to those women now. The last few years have been terrible for you. I know you will have hated every minute of this inquiry, but I want you to know that you have been in my mind every day. You are, and you have always been, my only motivation in all of this. My aim is for this to never happen again to any woman. Of the work of our committee, I will say only this. Ministers and former ministers must reflect the better natures of the communities they are appointed to serve. That did not happen here. Conference, my 5 years in Parliament have opened my eyes to just how fat and entitled the SNP have become in 14 years of government. There is a fire in the mountain of Scottish politics right now. Once great institutions have been tainted by the rot that now seeps through every extremity of the party of government. Honourable people have been unfairly tarnished and entangled in the web of intrigue given rise to by the civil war that now rages within the Scottish National Party. Conference, this government was failing and in decline long before the COVID-19 arrived on our shores. There have been warning lights flashing right across the dashboard of Scottish public policy for years. In the 2-year waits for first-line child and adolescent mental health treatment, in the widening educational attainment gap, and in the hospital waiting time guarantee, a law passed by Nicola Sturgeon herself and broken several 100,000 times by this government. But the measure of this administration can be found in how they've managed those things during this crisis unrelated to the virus that were already broken and in need of repair. There were a raft of issues crying out for attention: drug deaths, mental health, GRA reform, the threadbare state of our police force, all of which presented a problem for the SNP, and so it used the emergency to defer action on them. But miraculously, they still found precious parliamentary time in their final programme for government for legislation around the logistics of another unwanted independence referendum. Conference, our nation is exhausted. We need a period of calm and stability. We need a government that will put the recovery first, not plunge us into further division and uncertainty that a referendum would surely bring. Scotland deserves better. Scotland demands better. Conference, on the night of his election, Irish state broadcaster RTE aired a montage of Joe Biden's life with the president-elect reading an extract from The Cure at Troy by Seamus Heaney. History says, don't hope on this side of the grave. But then, once in a lifetime, the longed-for tidal wave of hope and justice can rise up, and hope and history rhyme. As Liberals, we know a lot about our history, and we know a lot about hope. It sustains us. We hope for those around us and our constituents and our communities. We hope for what our country can be and the wider world around us. We carry with us the hope and the history of those liberals on whose shoulders we stand. That is a powerful inheritance. Just like they could, we can see the betterment in the lives of the people we serve that liberalism can bring. And we need liberalism now more than ever. Conference, this coming election is a battle for the soul of our country. We should approach that test with growing confidence in our candidates, in our message, and in our party. The victories of Liberals are never entirely expected. Charles Kennedy won his seat from 4th place. It is not the size of the dog in the fight that matters, it's the size of the fight in the dog. And to those who write us off, I say this: I don't think you've seen us coming, but you should expect us.